All right, good evening. We're going to get started. Tonight we're learning Maseches Pesachim, Daf Samach Gimel, and most of Samach Dalet Amud Aleph. We are a blot behind, a rare occasion for our Daf Yomi shiur. Baruch Hashem, thank God we're rarely behind. So tonight we'll learn a blot and a half. And then tomorrow is the Mishnah covers much of the bottom of that whole Amud, so we'll learn that quickly tomorrow. And then as well get through Daf Samach Hey to the end of the parak, and then we'll stop. And then we'll be caught up by Tuesday. Okay, we're starting 7 or 8 lines from the bottom of Samach Beis, Amud Beis. Yesterday, we began a brief conversation about Sefer Yuchsin, a discussion in the Meforshim what Sefer Yuchsin is, but what seemed clear from the Gemara, or what will seem clear from the Gemara, is that it was a commentary of sorts on Sefer Divrei Hayomim. So it was such a Sefer that was so rich with Torah that when it got lost, says the Gemara, it caused for some problems. Amar Rami bar Rav Yudah, Amar Rav, Miyom she'nignaz Sefer Yuchsin, from the time that Sefer Yuchsin was nignaz, the time that it was hidden, so says the Gemara, Tashash kochan shel chachamim, the strength of the chachamim became weakened, v'keha me'or einehem, and their vision became blurry. It's an amazing thing that we're speaking now about the greats. This is a comment from Rav. So he's looking back at the Tanaim and saying that the Tanaim were struggling because they didn't have Sefer Yuchsin. Alachas kama v'kama pi elef alfei alafim. We are up a creek, as it were, in regards to the Masorah, and it leads to so many issues. We don't have clarity. Famously, we know like one of the first machlokos in Jewish history was between Hillel and Shammai about smicha. We're well beyond that point. Like even in Gemara, teku, tish b'yataris kushiyos abayos, kasha, things that we don't know. So that was just Sefer Yuchsin. That was just one Sefer. And in fact, says the Gemara, Amar Mar Zutra bein otzel leotzel ta'inu daled mea gamle de. Between the words otzel and otzel, one parak apart in Divrei Hayomim Aleph. These two psukim are one parak apart. There were 400 camel loads of drashas. So I heard Rabbi Tzvi Zimmerman give a shiur a number of years ago that when we look at the Torah, we see psukim, but there are so many ramazim that are overlaid in the psukim, drashas and gematrias, and it's just meant to be a trigger for the memory of the bigger picture of what the Torah is. We should be able to know all 613 from looking at the psukim. We do it the backwards. We look at the Gemara, we're like, oh, that's what the pasuk meant. No, we're supposed to know the psukim well enough to say like, this must be what the Gemara means. So we just have it backwards. So it's a big problem. We're very far away from that. All right, we're going to start a sugya now. We have a source of Brisa here in the name of Acherim. We'll see shortly that Acherim is really Reb Meir. Stam Mishnah Reb Meir, not surprising. So here's what the Brisa writes. Acherim omer hiktim mulam le'arelim. If a person first has kavana by the Korban Pesach for people who are circumcised, and then he added or changed his mindset to arelim, to those who are uncircumcised, kasher. The Korban Pesach is still kasher. However, in contrast, arelim lemulam pasul. If the mindset first was for arelim and then he switched to mulam, those who are circumcised, the halacha is that it's pasul. So the Gemara is bothered by this Brisa. Why? What's with the inconsistency? Maishna mulam la'arelim de kasher. In the Reisha of the Mishnah of the Brisa, you said that if the mindset is first for those who are mulam, those who are circumcised, and then you switch to arelim, why did we say it's kasher? Dekula orla ba'in v'leka. Because when is it really problematic? When the mindset of the shochet of the kohen is that it's only for those who are arelim. That's when it's really problematic. But here it's mixed. It's both. You've got some arelim and some mulam, so it should be fine in this case because dekula orla ba'in v'leka. So says the Gemara, if that's true, well, the Seifa is also a mixed bag. In the Seifa too, what did we say in the Brisa? Arelim lemulam nami kula orla ba'in v'leka. We have the same problem. You have some yes and some no. Some are arelim, some mulam. So the Gemara doesn't understand why the Acherim made this split between when it's first mulam followed by arelim is kosher, but when it's arelim followed by mulam, it's not kosher. Why? Why? The only preclusion should be when everyone is an orel. So the Gemara is going to present 3 different answers, which will bring us to the Mishnah. Answer number 1: Leima kasavre acherim eino l'shchita ela b'sof. Maybe we should say that we're eino l'shchita ela b'sof means that there is one final point in time in your mindset, and that is whatever comes out of your mouth, that is what is gorein. So as we saw earlier in the Masechta, the Amar Rava adayin hi machlokas, that there still is a machlokas about this, about what? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi dibur maschal adayin hi machlokas. We're not going to read the whole Rashi, but do glance down and see how long this Rashi is. So it's just so that you recognize we're only reading the first 2-3 lines, but just to give you some information about how sophisticated this Gemara is. Rashi does not mince words. So if he's using these words, there's a lot going on here, of course. But let's just get the Tamtzis Advarim. Rashi Dibra Maschel Adayin Machlokes. Gabe Tafus Lashon Rishon. We know that there's a machlokes about whether the first thing that comes out of your mouth is tafus. And there we have the Fligu Bar Reb Meir Rabbi Yossi. Machlokes are Meir Rabbi Yossi. And Rashi says, second line, Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, Be'omer Hareza Tumuras Ola. And then you said Tmuras Shlamim. So the halacha is Hareza Zet Tmuras Ola Divi Reb Meir the Tafus Lashon Rishon. That's what's going on here. Let's go back in our Gemara. That's Tafus Lashon Rishon. So there's a machlokes, so Reb Meir Rabbi Yossi, but it's Tafus Lashon Rishon. That's the language of Ein L'Shchita El B'Sof. Whatever comes out of your mouth is going to be final. Hilkach. Therefore, now we have a lens through which to look at this brisa that was confusing. Hikdim Mulan Areilin Mulan Chayle Areilin No Chayle. Because in L'Shchita El B'Sof, according to Reb Meir. So therefore, whatever comes out of your mouth first is final, and therefore you said mulin, good, you're good to go. The korban's fine. The arelim is irrelevant. That was the second thing that you said, but the first thing that came out of your mouth was mulin, so then you're good. However, fourth line, if what you said first is that this korban is for arelim followed by lamulin, so then arelim chayle, mulin lo chayle. So says the Gemara, that's answer number one. Amar Rabba, lo, that's not correct. There's another way to understand this Gemara. It's not going to be about the machlokas of what's tafos lashon rishon or not tafos lashon rishon. That's not what it's about. Le'olam kasavre acherim yeshna l'shchita mitchila ve'ad sof. Really, maybe it's the case that everyone agrees that all of the languages would be included in this case. V'acha b'maya skinan kegon de gamar. You really intended on both in your heart. You were thinking, your brain was saying, I really want to include both. However, you said the word la'arelim. This is the seif of the brisa. You said arelim first. Then what came out of your mouth? Arelim, the shochet took the knife and the back and forth motion, the animal was kosher by the time you wanted to say lamulin. So then you're done. Then the shechita is done. It's not about tafos lashon rishon or not. It was about a question of what your kavanah is. Here's the machlokas between acherim and what the others would hold. Whereas 8 lines down, what would he hold? I don't need your peh and your lave to be the same. So therefore, when you say arelim, you're done. Your heart was saying something else, not relevant. What happened, happened. You said arelim, the shechita was done. Your kavana was for lamulin. Good, you had a feeling. That's good, but it's not halachically relevant. Mashein kain v'rabbanon savre boinan pi v'libo shavim. We need them to be equal, so therefore they would hold differently. But that's why the seif of the brisa is of the opinion. The seif of the brisa is of the opinion that it should not be kosher if you think of arelim first. So that is going to be answer number 2, but the Gemara is bothered by that. It says the Gemara, "V'kasavar of Meir lo ba'inan pi v'libo shavin." Does he not hold that you need to have your thoughts and your mouth say the same thing? That can't possibly be true. Rabbi Meir can't say that. Uraminu, a third of the way down. We have a contradiction from a source in the Tanaim. This is a Mishnah in Maseches Truma. The Mishnah writes, "Amiskavin lomar truma va'amar meiser." Someone who's trying to separate their foods and they make a mistake. They said they had the kavana to be to separate truma, but instead they said meiser, or the reverse, meiser v'amar truma. O she'eni nichnas labay zeh v'amar lazeh. I'm not going into house X, but instead he said house Y. She'eni nenne lazeh. I'm not going to benefit from X, but instead he said v'amar lazeh from Y. Lo amar klum. He hasn't said anything. Jehu pi v'libo shavin. So the whole second answer that Rabbah presented was about pev v'libo shavin. Do we say pi v'libo shavin has to be the case? So the only way that within this answer that Rav Meir, that acherim, that the brisa at the bottom makes sense, is if you say like Rav Meir that pi v'libo are not shavin, that we don't care if they're shavin, but that can't be because Rav Meir in this Stam Mishnah Maseches Truma doesn't say that. He says the exact opposite. Ella Amar Abaye, really things are very different. The whole thing is totally different, and this will bring us to the Mishnah. Ella Amar Abaye, Reisha da Amar Simin Rishon Lamulen, the Simin Sheni Afle Arelim. In the Reish of the Mishnah, where we said first the language of Mulin followed by Arelim. So there, by the Siman Rishon, we know, of course, the din is that one is obligated to cut the rove, the majority of the kana and the veshet, the windpipe and the esophagus in order to make a shchita kosher. You got to be careful. You got to check the knife before. You got to check the knife after. You don't want to go too deep that you hit the spine behind that because then you don't know if it chips the blade. If the blade was chipped before, all bunch of shaylas. Got to be very careful. A lot of halachos about shchita. It's the first 29, 30 simanim of Yoredeya. So there, here was his mindset. In the Reish of Acherim, he says first Mulim and then Arelim. So what was going on in the brain of the Shochet? So here's what he said. Reisha, in the beginning, the first part of the Brisa was De Amar, Siman Rishon Lamulin. The first of the two Simanim was for Lamulin, for those who are circumcised. But Siman Sheni, even for Arelim. De B'Siman Sheni Namen Psiche Bamulin. He even includes Mulin in the second one, and therefore the korban's going to be kosher because each Siman included at least some Mulin. Good, that's wonderful. That actually makes sense. Seifa, what was the Seifa? Where first he said Arelim and then followed by Mulim, where first he said the worst category, those who are uncircumcised, followed by those who are circumcised. Seifa, da Amar Rishon la Arelim. The first whole siman is for Arelim. Siman Sheni la Mulim. Siman Rishon halop siche be Mulim. And the mindset during the first of the two simanim was to be exclusively for Arelim. Rav Meir L'Taime, what is Yilda Amar Mefaglen B'chatzi Matir? You can have pigul even if it's only with half of that which is the matir. There's two simanim. You had a negative mindset on one of the two simanim. So mafaglan machatzi matir, you can create pigul, a negative machshava and a korban. And that's why he says it's not kosher, because one, the first siman in your brain, you were thinking about Arelim for the korban pesach. That's a psul, mafaglan machatzi matir. We can have pigul even with only half of that which is matir, but the Rabbanan argue, Rabbanan l'taimayu, they say, no. We would say that if you say mulin la'arelim, or arelim and then mulin, they'd both be kosher, because what do they hold? They hold that even if your mindset by the first of the two simanim was for the sake of, if the first two were for Arelim, so that would be totally fine, because they hold Da'amre ein mefaglim b'chatzi matir. You cannot have pigul with only one part of the mindset. It has to apply to both. So because he was only thinking about Arelim for one of the two simanim, so therefore it's going to be mutter even if you first say Arelim and then say Mulin. That brings us to the Mishnah. This Mishnah speaks about the Isser de'oraisa of lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi, to bring a korban pesach and maybe even other korbanos, as we will soon see, when there is chametz. Where is the chametz? Is the chametz with you? Is the chametz at your house? Is the chametz anywhere in the world? Who owns the chametz? Is it the shochet's chametz? We have to figure out the parameters, because we have a real isser d'oraisa of lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. We have to figure out what's going on here. So it says the Mishnah 3/4 of the way down, Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. Hashochet es pesach al hachametz. If a person shechts the korban pesach on chametz, over below saaseh, they violate an Isser De'oraisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Af HaTamid. Even the korban HaTamid that's brought Bein HaArbayim on Erev Pesach, even that korban, if it's brought Al Chametz, you violate an Isser De'oraisa. In contrast to both of these, Rabbi Shimon Omer, this is a little sophisticated. He's got like a whole, we really should make a chart here. Rabbi Shimon Omer as follows. He says, HaPesach, when there's a korban Pesach, so Be'arba Asar, on the 14th of Nisan, Lishmo Chayiv, if you're bringing the korban Pesach in its right time, for its right purpose, on the right day of Yud Daled Nisan, but there's chametz, that's a violation of Lo Tishchat al Chametz Dam Zivchi. V'shalo lishmo pater. But if you only were bringing it as a regular shlamim and it was al chametz, that's pater. That's not the Isser D'oraisa. So far, Reb Shimon seems to hold that the Isser D'oraisa of lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi is when you bring the korban pesach on Yud Daled when there's chametz. Good. However, ushar kol hazvachim. What about all the other korbanos that are brought on Yud Daled? Bein lishman, bein shelo lishman pater. Doesn't make a difference. All of them are going to be totally fine. So the tamid, whatever, all of them are going to be totally pater. But all of that is before Pesach on Yud Daled. Uvim moed, what about on the holiday? So on the holiday, it's a little different. Lishmo, when your mindset is to actually take this animal and bring a korban Pesach late, right? You want to bring the korban Pesach on Tes Zayin, whatever it is. So then pater, and shelo lishmo chayim. But to do a shlamim at that time, the shlamim is a normal korban to bring during the chag itself, then we would say chayiv if there's any chametz to be involved. Ushar kol hazvachim, and at that time, any other korbanos, bein lishman, bein shelo lishma chayiv, let's say you bring a tamid on any of those days and there's chametz, any other korban, the halacha is that it should be that you're chayiv. Chutz min achatas sheshchato shelo lishma. The only exception would be, once it's already yontiv, is if you bring a korban chatas and it was shechted shelo lishma. Okay, these are the three shitas, that there's an Isser D'oraisa only by the Korban Pesach, that there is an Isser D'oraisa by the Korban Pesach and the Parashas HaTamid, and then this blended answer of Reb Shimon that it really depends what day we're talking about. Is it the 14th of Nisan, Are we then talking about the Korban Pesach? Are we talking about the other Zvachim? And then once it's on Pesach, are we talking about the Korban Pesach being brought late? All the variations within the Mishnah. So Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish, beginning the Gemara, a couple lines from the bottom, Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. Reb Shimon ben Lakish says, La'olam, Eino chayav ad she'achametz l'shochet o l'zorek. There will be no Isser D'Oraisa of lo tishchata al chametz dam zivchi. You cannot violate the Isser chametz, the Isser of shchita on top of chametz, unless the chametz belongs to the shochet or to the zorek, the kohen who's doing the zrikas hadam, o le'echad mibnei chabura. Okay, or any of the people who will be the beneficiaries of the korban. And then here's a crazy line. And unless the chametz is with you in the azara, what kind of Jew are you that you are bringing chametz that you violate with bal yirah bal yimatzeh into the mikdash in order to bring your korban pesach? That's crazy town. How could you possibly be in such a scenario? That is the shita of the Gemara in the name of Rav Ashi. Rav Yochanan's like, what are you talking about? Afal pi she'eni mo ba'azara. Rav Yochanan amar afal pi she'eni mo ba'azara. No. You don't have to bring it with you to violate the Isser. Stop. You just, if you're in violation of Ayah Rabbi Matzeh, and then you also bring your Korban Pesach, so then Pashat that you're going to be Chai. But to bring it with you, that's really brazen. That's not normal. That's not the way things are. So b'mai kamiflage, what is it that they're talking about? A few different possibilities. Actually, really only two. We're going to learn one. We're going to bring a second one, and then we're going to come back to the first one. So here's answer number one. B'mai kamiflage, samach gimel amud beis, 3 lines down. Ilema be'al samuch kamiflage. What the word al means? Lo tishchat al chametz dam ziv. What does that mean? Al chametz. That implies a certain closeness, a certain proximity between the shchita and the chametz. So let's see how the Gemara analyzes that. If you want to say that what Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish are arguing about is what the word al means in the pasuk, the Rav Shimon ben Lakish savar al b'samuch mamish. The word means lo tishchat al chametz dam ziv. It's got to be there. It's got to be present. It's got to be in the azara. So that's a strict understanding, a very literal understanding of the pasuk. Fine, that's his approach. For Rav Yochanan savar, no, lo ba'inan al b'samuch. That's not what it means. But says the Gemara, if that's true, that what we're discussing is what the word al means, well, then we've already learned that. We already had this machlokas with the same opponents, with the same balei plugta about the same topic. Where did we have this machlokas? So here we have a Mishnah. This Mishnah is quoted in Maseches Menachos. Titnan, hashochet toda lifnim, v'lachma chutz lechoma lo kidesh halechem. Let's say when it comes to the Korban Toda, a person shechs the animal in the appropriate place, lifnim, inside the Beis HaMikdash. However, velachma chutz lechoma. But the lechem was outside of the walls of the Mikdash. So the halacha is lo kidesh halechem. So says the Gemara, my chutz lechoma. What does the Mishnah mean when it says it is chutz lechoma? So it says the Gemara as follows. Rabbi Yochanan Amar chutz lechomas beis pagi, according to many Meforshim, beis pagi means outside of Yerushalayim. That's what Rashi says. Hainu makom chitzon shebYerushalayim. So that's what he means. If it's outside of Yerushalayim, that's what it means. About chutz lechomas azara kadish. Rabbi Yochanan l'shitaso. He says it doesn't have to be mamish with you. It can be outside the azara. It just has to be within a relative proximity. It has to be in your house, whatever it is. But it doesn't have to be mamish in the mikdash for the bread to be kiddush. He holds its kiddush. V'lo ba'inan al b'samach. We don't say it has to mamish be dalet amos, the same azara, the same room. We don't say that. No, forget about outside Yerushalayim. Even outside the Choma, even outside the walls of the Azara, it still won't be Kaddish Alma. What do we see from Rav Shimon ben Lakish? What do we see from him? So the Gemara is very bothered. It can't be that our machlokes over here about how do we define the pasuk of Lo Tishchat al Chametz Dam. What does al mean? Does it mean mamish in the Azara like Reish Lakish? Or does it mean, no, just relax, it's not so literal. Wherever your chametz is, if you're violating by Rabbi Matzeh, then you're going to violate this Isser. So that can't be their machlokes, because we already had that machlokes in Menachos, and they're not going to have the same battle twice. So that can't be. So if that's true, says the Gemara, we're about 10 lines down, 11 lines down, the Gemara says, Ella, no. Reb Shimon ben Lakish and Rav Yochanan are arguing about something else. What do we do about a case of hasra, about giving warning, but when there is a suffix? Let's see how this plays out. So says the Gemara, if that's what they're arguing about, same problem as we had before, the problem is, they already fought about this. They had this battle somewhere else. Where did we have this battle? This is a Gemara in the very beginning of Maseches Shavuos to Itmar. The Amoraim have the following battle: Shavua she'ochel kikar zu hayom ve'ovar hayom velo achla. Let's say a person makes a Shavua that they will eat this food right now, but the day passes and they didn't eat it. So do they get malchos? Yes or no? So that is subject to a machlokes of the same Baalei Plukta. Rabbi Yochanan v'Rav Shimon ben Lakish Tamri Tarvaihu Eino Loke. They both agree that there is no malchos here, but there's a machlokes as to why. 1/3 of the way down, Samech Gimel Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Eino Loke Mishum Dahavalei Lav Shein Bo Maisa. You didn't do anything. Literally, you didn't do anything. You made a neder, you made a promise that you're going to eat a loaf of bread by the end of the day, and then you were a couch potato for the entire day until Shkia Sachama. You literally did nothing. You can't get malchos for that. You didn't lift a finger. And by the way, we paskin like this ladina, is that when we say that there's an Isser malchos, even if it's Isser Doraisa, so the din is when there's a lav she'ein bo maisa, there are no malchos. However, aval hasra safek shma hasra. It's still considered to be hasra safek. It's still considered to be a good hasra, a good warning about the isser that you're about to do. There's no malchus. That's the onesh. But the isser, you can still say to the person, hey, you better finish this food. You made a neder. So he says that we still have this concept of hasra safek. Rav Shimon ben Lakish Omar Eino Loke. He says no. He says that there is no malchos, but for a different reason. Mishum dahaval asra sabek, asra sabek lo shmasra. Avalav shein bo ma'isa lo ken alav. So their machlokes is flip-flopped. The way that Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Shimon ben Lakish look at this is that according to Rabbi Yochanan, he says that there's no malchos. It's a side din in onshin. You violate the isser of nedarim, of a shvua. You made a shvua that you didn't fulfill. So you get an isser d'oraisa. You don't get malchos, but still your hasra is a hasra. But Reish Lakish is the exact reverse. He says, no, the reason why you don't get malchos is because you can't give asra, because asra suffix is lo shma asra. And parenthetically, you do get malchos in a case like that where you don't lift a finger. We don't pass it like him, we pass it the other way. So anyway, the Gemara is bothered by answer number 2. You want to tell me it's about asra suffix? We already had that machlokes. That can't be what our Mishnah is discussing. When our Mishnah is talking about what the word al means by lo sishchat al chametz dam zivri, does the chametz have to be in the azara with you, or could it even be in your own home? It's not what they're arguing about. It's just not. So it says the Gemara, therefore it must be about something else. We're almost halfway down Samech Gimel Amud Beis, and says the Gemara, answer number 3, which really is answer number 1. Amre, really le'olam. Let's go back to where we started. The al samach kamiflage. Really, we are talking about that. And let me just review. Reish Lakish says al means literally al. He looks at the pasuk. He says, stop giving me interpretations. This is what the pasuk means. When it's in the room, it's a problem. When it's not in the room, it's not a problem. Rabbi Yochanan is like, relax. It's not so literal. Everything's okay. Even if it's in the community, it's in your house, it's outside the Azara, it's still going to be an Isra. Lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi. So says the Gemara, but you just told me that they already had that machlokes. Says the Gemara, it's tzricha. No, we need both machlokos. We need the machlokes that we're having over here by lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi, and we need a similar machlokes that we had in regards to the Toda, where the Korban Toda was brought lifnim, but the Lachme Toda were michutz l'choma. Why do we need both cases? Says the Gemara as follows. Remember the structure of its richusa, of its richa. We're going to explain why we need both cases by flip-flopping them. Here's number 1. If they only argued over here, in our case, have a mina be'ahu, hu de'amar Rav Yochanan dol ba'inan al b'samach mishum de'isser hu. V'kolhecha de'isei. It's an isser. Wherever it is. Where there's isser there, then that's going to be a problem. Aval le'inyan mikdash lechem lo kaddish ela bifnim. But in regards to whether or not the bread would become kodesh, ema modale, maybe he'd agree in that case. The Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish tebuinan al b'samach. That's different. One's talking about Isser and one's talking about Kedusha. They're not the same case. The room is holy. Got to bring it in there. And if the lechem is not in there, maybe Rabbi Yochanan would agree in the case of lechem apanim, that because it's michutz l'choma and because the holy place is inside, how could you call the stuff outside holy? But here, what we're talking about is Isser. We're talking about whether or not you violate the Isser of lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. They're not the same thing. The cases are incomparable, and therefore, midi dahave akli shares. What, the kli shares is going to be holy when it's down the block? No, it's only in the mikdash. And therefore, maybe Rav Yochanan would have capitulated to the opinion of Rav Shimon ben Lakish in regards to the case of lachmei toda. However, and therefore tzricha. However, v'yesh min in your mikdash lechem. If we only would have had the case from Maseches Menachos, the case where the korban was brought, lifnim, and the lechem is michutz l'choma. So then says the Gemara, Havamina behach kama Reb Shimon ben Lakish to ben Abba. Only there would Reb Shimon ben Lakish give this strict literal interpretation of the pasuk to say that al is literal right there. Diisa gavoi kadishi lo kadish. Aval. Let me just translate that. If had it been that the bread was inside the mikdash, that it would have been holy, and if not, not. Aval, maybe Rav Shimon ben Lakish would have had a totally different feel had it been about something else, about Inyan Chametz. Maybe we would have said, Modele, the Rav Shimon ben Lakish would have agreed with Rav Yochanan, de lo ba'inan al v'samuch, de isurahu, v'chol echad isei, tzricha. They're the same arguments in reverse. But the point is that we need both, because the whole etzem argument of Rav Shimon ben Lakish and Rav Yochanan by the Chametz, we're dealing with an Isser. We're not dealing with Kedusha. We're dealing with an Isser. When you bring Korban X and it has a rule of Lo Tishchat Al Chametz, where does the Chametz have to be located to trigger the Isser? It's an Isser Beheter Shaila. But when you're talking about Kedusha, of being Makdish, something, okay, then it's got to be like in the location of the Mikdash. That's why maybe we would have said that no, one without the other. We needed both machlokos, tzricha. If you wouldn't have had the one by chametz, I would have thought that's only by Yisr Beheter. So therefore, maybe Rav Yochanan would have been lenient, would have been strict like Reish Lakish. So therefore, we need both cases. And the Gemara ends this conversation there with this answer. So let's just review quickly what we started with in this Gemara. We said, hey, what's going on here with the word al? This is a basic pasuk in the Torah. We're familiar with this pasuk. Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi, machlokes Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish about what the word al means. Is al literal location? Sometimes when you send someone your location from your phone, it's within a certain number of meters. It's very close. Yes, correct. It's not citywide. It's very, very localized. It's in the Azora. That's Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Rav Yochanan's it's not so literal like that. And that's the Paskin, I presume, like Rav Yochanan, like we normally would, that the Yisr Daraisa Lo Tishchat Al Chametz Dam Zivchi is not so limited. It's still possible to violate it even if the Chametz isn't with you. Good. The Gemara, 3/4 of the way down, about 7 or 8 lines before the wide line, asks the following question. Bamine Ravoshi Amiravami. Very, very early on, we're right. Ein lo l'shochet, v'yesh lo lechem ibnei chabura mahu. Let's say that the shochet has no chametz. He has not violated by Rabbi Motzei. However, one of the bnei chabura does have chametz. Mahu. Would this be a violation of lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi? Says the Gemara, Amar le niksiv lo tishchat al chametzcha. Does it have to be literally your chametz? That's not what the pasuk says. No. Lo tishchat al chametz ksiv. Just any chametz anywhere. Says Gemara, Omar le ihachi afidu leechad besofa olam nami. There's a Jew on the other side, on the other hemisphere, who's got chametz. So every korban that's brought because of that guy who forgot to do bittul, every korban. What does that even mean? Of course that's not true. So how do we understand the pasuk then? Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. You can't say chametzcha. That's not what the pasuk says. So what about the shochet? It wasn't his chametz. It was only the bnei chabura's chametz. So it says the Gemara as follows: Amar le, Amar kra lo tishchat. What does it mean? V'lo yalin. The pasuk says only when there's lina. Lo tishchat al chametz hanach dekaime alei mishum lo yalin. For whomever there will be an isser of halana, of leaving out the meat too long, those are the people for whom there will be a trigger of them having chametz. So will the shochet violate the isser of halana? He's not even part of the chabura. So it's fine. It's only when the chametz belongs to the bnei chabura because they have the isser of halana. The shochet, no, it's not shaykh by him. Omar Rav Papa. Rav Papa therefore says, Hilkach, therefore. And we're going to learn what Rav Papa has to say, bring a brisa to support him, and ask a source in the time against this brisa. So let's hold cup here for a moment. Omar Rav Papa Hilkach, therefore. Kohen Amaktir Esa Chelev. If a Kohen is bringing Chelev, well, if he's bringing Chelev, the Kohen has a halacha of halana. So therefore, over below Saseh, Hova Yeshno Mechlal Halana Semurin. He's got a problem of halana Semurin. So therefore, by him, not Stam, not by the Bnei Chabur, but by the Chalavim that apply to him. But then he's going to violate the Yisrael Los Yishchat Al Chametz Dam. Tanya Kavashet the Rav Papa. Here is the brisa to support. We have to follow the pieces here because two of them are going to be contradicted. Hashoch, I'll foreshadow as we move along. Hashochet es haPesach al chametz over below sase. Someone who shechs the korban Pesach when there's chametz present. Again, machlokes Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish. So they violate the Isser de Oraisa of Los Yishchat al Chametz Dam Zivchid. It's an over below sase. Emasai bisman shu shochet. Bisman shehu l'shochet or l'zorek or le'echad mibnei chabura. Any of those people. However, if it was for someone on the other side of the world, pasha that's not going to trigger the yisur. The echad hashochet, the echad hazorek, the echad hamaktir chayiv. Any of those people, they are the ones who are going to be held accountable. Aval, however, hamolek, malika was in regards to birds. They would use their nail in order to do some procedure on the chicken. They were molek esaof bar basar. A person on Erev Pesach. They were molek if they did malika. Ain't no over below klum. They didn't do anything wrong. Why? Because malika is not inherent in the korban Pesach process. So you can't say lo tishchat al chamet dam zivchi. It's malika. It's not a korban Pesach. Not shy. Good. Or minhi. We just saw this brisa to support Rav Papa. However, there's a double contradiction in this brisa, and that will bring us to the top of the Amud. Let's see what this says. Says the brisa as follows: Hashochet es haPesach al hachametz over below saseh. Same as before. Match. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Afatamid. That's our Mishnah. Match. Omar lo Omer Elba Pesach bilvad. This only applies by Hilchos Pesach. Mosai. When is this true? Bisman sheyesh l'shochet o lezorek o lechem ibnei chabura. Match. Good. Haya le'echad b'sof o lemein zakuk. Match. Same. Okay. Here's where things get a little dicey. Now we said ve'echad hashochet, ve'echad hazorek. Good to go. Ve'echad hamolek, ve'echad hamazeh. If you do malika on a bird, not shaykh to korban Pesach, and if you're mazeh is basically zrika, but for a bird where you press it against the mikdash to draw out the blood. It's the equivalent of zrika, but by a bird. So then chaya. So that's not right. That's not right. We said in the brisa that came to support Rav Papa that malika is not shaykh by korban Pesach. So how could you violate lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi? It's malika. It's hazah. It's mazeh. That's by birds. Birds have nothing to do with korban Pesach at all. They're birds. They don't even count. That's problem number one. Let's keep going. The brisa continues. If someone does kemitza by a mincha, ain't over below saseh, and there's chametz there, so then there's no problem at all. Hamaktir is ha'imurin. We said earlier about haktaras imurin that because there was a din of halana for the shochet, so therefore he would violate lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. So hamaktir is ha'imurin. What should we expect? We should see that you're chayiv. What does the brisa say? Ain't no over below saseh. You don't violate it. So then says the Gemara, top of Samach Dal Abanav, Akasha Malika, Kasha Aktar. We have a double problem. The Malika thing makes no sense. In one case, in the brisa that came to support Rav Papa, you said the Malika is not eligible to violate the Yisrael Lo Tishchat Al Chametz Dam Zivchi because it's a bird, right? So that's good. But Haktara, and then you said by the Malika on the bottom of the page that there is an Isser. And then by Haktara, we had the same problem. Earlier, you said that the Haktara was a problem of Halana, that because the Kohen has an Isser of Lina, so therefore he's going to have a problem of Lo Tishchat. So that's a problem. And then we said later at the very last words of Samach Gimel Lamed Beis, Eino over below Saseh. How do we answer this question? Says the Gemara, well, wait a minute. Before we even get there, we have a structural problem with Tameich. Let me ask you a better question. Tikshilach gufa. There's a problem with the brisa itself that we just learned. Dekatani lo amri ela bepesach bilvad. First, you said it's all about Pesach, and then v'hadar tani echad hashochet v'echad hazog v'echad hamolek v'echad hamazeh. You said it's all about Pesach, and then it's all about the birds. No, you can't have it both ways. Malika has nothing to do with Pesach, so therefore stira. So says the Gemara, don't worry. Don't worry. Everything is okay. Deep breath. Everything is fine. This stira is not so bad. Really, everything is according to Reb Shimon. How do we answer this problem? Malika lokasha. In one case, we said that Malika was not problematic because it's not part of the process of the Paschal Lamb. And then we saw in the second brisa that it is a problem. How do we answer that? Says the Gemara, one is talking about on Erev Pesach, where yes, it's correct, it has nothing to do with anything. One's talking about during Chol HaMoed, when if you're bringing an animal on Pesach, then it's shaykh to chametz. So that's how Rav Shimon would answer that question. The Gemara here is kan ba'arbasar, kan b'chol shel moed. The next four words, the Rav Shimon, he is removed according to some of the kisvei yad. In the Hagos V'Tzionim here in the Oz Bahadar Gemaras, it says on the side, the Rav Shimon, he leisa b'kisvei hayad. This was not found in the earlier handwritten Gemaras that they were looking at. All the various versions upon which many changes in this Gemara were found based on the kisvei yad. So these words don't belong. Structurally as well, it's like almost uncomfortable to add them in the Gemara. It doesn't really fit properly. Anyways, that's part one. Haktara, nami lo kasha. That's also not a problem. We said that Haktara initially is a problem because it's shaykh by lina, because there's an isser, there's an expiry date on it, and because there's an expiration date. So therefore, because the Kohen has to be worried about lina, he has to be worried about chametz. Then we said in the last line of Samach Gimel Amud Beis, ain't over below saseh. So Haktara, nami lo kasha. Tanai, there's a machlokes. The ika de makish aktar l'shchita, the ika man de lo makish. Some compare aktar to shchita, and some don't. So that's why there's different answers about haktar as to whether or not it's the same as shchita. Good. So that's just different shitas. So let's knock off a couple of short gemaras, and then we will get to the Mishnah and stop for the night. Says the Gemara, we learned about Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Afat Tamid. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Afat Tamid, that on Erev Pesach, if you bring the Korban Tamid Shalbein Harbayim and you still have chametz, we know the Korban Tamid Shalbein Harbayim has to be after Chatzos, which means that the Yisur of chametz already kicks in because the Yisur of chametz starts at the beginning of the 7th hour. So we know that those two things are sequential in time; they don't overlap. So therefore, it should be Aser. Says the Gemara, my time with Rabbi Yehuda. Why does he say that the Korban Tamid is going to be in violation of the Yisur D'Oraisa of Lo Sishchat Al Chametz? Says the Gemara, Amar Lach Zivchi. It says in the pasuk Zivchi. What is the pasuk? The pasuk reads Lo Sizbach Al Chametz Dam Zivchi, Lo Yalin Chelev Chagi Ad Boker. So the word Zivchi, Zevach HaMiyuchadli. What is the Zevach that is Miyuchad to me? That is Umaynihu Tamid. This is a Kodesh Baruch Hu's Miyuchadli. And again, just a push wherever possible, we should say the Parashas HaTamid. It should become part of our routine if it isn't already part of our routine. And the poskim are very, very charif about the importance of saying it. If you're running up against Tefillah B'tzibur versus Parashas HaTamid, good shaila. Those are good shailas. I made this comment. I was talking and learning with someone, not in halachic terms. I said it made sense to me off the cuff that if you're choosing to say one more paragraph of Psuki de Zimra versus the Parshas HaTamid, I was guessing. I didn't ask the shaila. I don't know. L'chor, you should say the Parshas HaTamid because according to Samya, it's U'Neshalama Farim Sifaseinu. Okay, good. Let's continue. Says Gemara, 2 dots, a quarter of the way down. Reb Shimon Omer. Remember Reb Shimon's answer. Reb Shimon in the Mishnah said that in regards to Pesach, if it's the 14th, then the halachos were one thing, and if it was on Yom Tov, then the halachos were another. So let's analyze his shita. My time at Reb Shimon. What's the reason why he held the way he did? Tichsiv zivchi trei zimne. It says the word zivchi twice, and the Gemara does something strange about that. Karibeh, how do we read these two words? Zevach zivachai. It's as if we moved one of the yuds. So it says the Gemara, Lemai hilchasa palginhu rachmana mehadade v'lo ksiv zivachai. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu make it that both yuds were separated? Why didn't he put both yuds together? So answers the Gemara, Lemeimar, Bizman deika zevach lo mechayev azvachai. When there is a mitzvah of zevach, then lo mechayev azvachai. He argues and says, you're not going to be chayev azvachai on my korban, on the Parashas HaTamid, on the korban HaTamid. Bizman deleka zevach, but when there is no korban Pesach, which is going to be Yantif itself, then mechayev azvachai. Then he says you will be chayev on the korban Tamid. Uvemoed lishmo pater. He says that if this is Reb Shimon still in the Mishnah, that if it's the moed, if it's Yantiv, and it's lishmo, you're doing it for the sake of the korban Pesach, you're late to the game. Pater, the halach is your pater. So it says Gemara that makes a diuk. Taima, what's the reason why you're going to be pater? D'shelo lishmo. He says because it's d'shelo lishmo. But I'm sorry, d'shelo lishmo would be chayev. Hastama, but if you didn't have that intention of shalol lishmo for a shlamim, when there was chametz around, it should be pater. Says Gemara, Amai, why would that be true? Pesach b'shari mos hashana shlamim have. During the year, let's say Yud Nisan, the example we've been giving over the last many days. Pesach b'shari mos hashana shlamim have shamas mina. What do we learn from this? Pesach b'shar Yemos Hashana by Akira. It implies from here that you need to have an Akira of machshava. You need to actually specifically say this is going to be dafka for shlamim. Otherwise, it seems to not be work. Otherwise, it should be pater. Amar Rav Chia bar Gamda nizr kamipicha bura. This was the conversation that was had in the Bnei Yeshiva. They don't remember who said it. That's what the Mefarshim point out. That it was mipicha chabura. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Kulam hodu b'davar zeh le'okume masnisan." Everyone agreed to the Mishnah in the following way. Va'amru, back in the Gemara, kigon shahayu bailim tamei emes. The people who were responsible to bring this korban were tamei mes, and then v'nidchin lePesach sheni, and then they were pushed off to give the korban at a later time. Tistame l'shum Pesach koyim. Because they never brought it, we assume in this case that it was always for the sake of the korban Pesach. That's why the din was a little difficult to understand, why the diuk was not so clear about what the stam machshava should be. In this case, the stam machshava is not what we would have thought. The diuk is wrong. The stam machshava, because nizr kamipia chabura, everyone agrees that was the mindset that we're talking about someone who was tamei meis, and because he was tamei meis, so therefore he was always thinking about bringing the korban Pesach. So his stam machshava was different. We'll stop here. Mirza Hashem will pick up tomorrow with a lengthy Mishnah to begin, and we will get to the end of the parak on the 2/3 of the way down on Samach Hey on the base. Wishing you all a beautiful.
Yes.